So he said, in between my teaching duties at the Nizamiyya, and between being a guide and a father and a husband, I studied philosophy by myself. He said, within 2 years, I mastered the entire discipline of philosophy. Okay, but you could say you've mastered it. You know, we as human beings, we suffer from delusions of grandeur. You see? So the only way you know whether you've mastered it, let the masters of the science say you've mastered it. So Ghazali writes a work on philosophy. And when he writes a work on philosophy, promoting quote-unquote philosophy, all the philosophers of his age says this is the greatest philosopher alive. They confirmed his own quote-unquote suspicion that he was the greatest philosopher alive. Once they had confirmed he was the greatest philosopher alive, he then writes the great work, Tahafatul Falasifa, translated into English, the incoherence of philosophy. He nails in the coffin of philosophy forever, ever. From the time of Ghazali, philosophy has never been an issue inside of the scholastic echelons of Islam. Ghazali finished it, period. 2 years of private study. What type of intellect is Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala? He had it all. He had the fame, he had the wealth, he had the knowledge, radiallahu anhu warda. But he didn't have the spirit. He didn't have the soul. That's Ghazali's own admittance. Fortunate for Ghazali, he has a great brother, Ahmad al-Ghazali. Ahmad al-Ghazali was influenced more by the spiritual realities of the religion than the formal outward aspects of the religion. Ahmad. Of the peculiar things, Ahmad's younger, Muhammad's older, Ghazali's older than his younger brother, Ahmad al-Ghazali. From the peculiar things, the younger brother Ahmad would never pray behind his older brother Muhammad, never pray behind him, ever. And what Ghazali was always troubled by this. His brother used to tell him that although you have knowledge, you don't have the purity of heart. Muhammad would see this as an affront. How can you tell the most knowledgeable man alive that I don't have religion, the purity of religion? So they used to argue a lot, the two brothers. Ahmad would never pray behind him, ever. The Imam of his age never prayed behind him. Muhammad does what any son would do. Go and complain to mum. So he goes to his mother and complains to his mother that Ahmad won't pray behind me. Even if not on the basis of religion, I'm the eldest. He should be praying behind me. So Ghazali's mother goes and complains to Ahmad, says, pray behind your brother. Even for my sake, just pray behind him. So what does he do? Ahmad then goes and prays behind his brother Muhammad for his mother's sake. Allahu Akbar, they're in prayer. The midst of the prayer, Ahmad al-Ghazali, Assalamu alaikum, Assalamu alaikum, leaves the ranks of the prayer, leaves the ranks. So Ghazali, when he finishes, Muhammad, he goes and complains. After all of that, you pray behind me, and you don't finish the prayer with me. You leave in the midst of the prayer. What's all that about? Ahmad al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, teaches his brother. He says, when I was praying behind you, all I could see coming from you was blood. There was blood pouring out of you. And as you're a jurist, you know blood is impure and it's impermissible to pray with blood on your body. You're najis. I can't pray behind somebody who's najis. Ahmed says. What does Muhammad say? He says, Subhanallah. He says, glory be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, in the midst of prayer, I was thinking about the rules of female menstruation. That's what he says. I was thinking about all of the rules of female menstruation. And that thought had a tangible manifestation for his brother Ahmed. Blood. He saw it. Once Ghazali, Muhammad saw that, he realized there's something. You have something. And then he begins to have conversations with Ahmed about the nature of the purification of the heart. What does that bring about? It brings about what is known as the crisis of Al-Ghazali. In the crisis, and some even consider it nearly like a mental breakdown, that he has a breakdown mentally, Al-Ghazali. Why? Because he realized, and he writes this in his own, he has a work, Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, like his own biography, radiallahu anhu. It's called Munqadh min al-Dalal. Munqadh min al-Dalal. Deliverance from error. It has at least 4, maybe 5 translations in English. Munqadh min al-Dalal. Really important book. It's a book everybody should get and read. Okay? Because Ghazali's life is our life. It's our life. What he tells you about what happens in his life, if that doesn't happen in our life, there's something wrong with our lives. Very important work. Ghazali realizes what he has means nothing on the scales of the next world. Doesn't matter how much knowledge he has, how much wealth he has, how much fame he has. If he dies without qalb salim, as Allah Ta'ala says, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, the day when neither your wealth or your children avail you, save for the one who comes unto Allah with a pure heart. And Ghazali himself realized his heart was not pure. Radiallahu anhu warda. So he has a crisis, and he does what virtually no man would ever do. It's rare to show you who Ghazali is. He just resigns from the world. Yani you have all that wealth, because to be the chair of the Nizamiyya, it was the most highly paid position on earth in that day. He was a wealthy man, resigned. What came with it? Fame. Resigned. He left his family, homeland, everything, Ghazali, and walks. Takes his wealth, gives it to his wife. This is all you need to take care of yourself and the children. And he leaves, radiallahu anhu warda. And he goes into what? A period of absolute obscurity. And that's what's being said here. In the month of Dhul Qa'dah of the year 488, after the flight, he left to perform the pilgrimage, and thereafter made his way to the Levant, remaining there for 10 years. Very little is known about what he did inside of that 10-year period. We know a few things. He was in absolute obscurity, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, for a 10-year period. Made Hajj several times. We know he stayed in Damascus, in Banu Umayyah, the Umayyad mosque in Damascus. We know he stayed in Jerusalem likewise. Few things we know about him during that period, but by and large, it's a period of absolute obscurity. Where Ghazali's point was to purify his heart and sit at the feet of the people who had mastered the science of what? Of purification, radiallahu anhu warda. He didn't want to be known. You go to Banu Umayyah now, in the Mi'dana, in the tower where you call the Adhan, the minaret of Banu Umayyah, the mosque, the Umayyad mosque, there's a room there called Ghazali's room. That's a room Ghazali used to live in, like what we'd say as a tramp. Just as this aesthetic tramp living inside of the mosque. And why does he leave? Because they discover who he is. Ghazali himself used to say, I used to go and sit in the circles of one of the scholars in the Umayyad mosque. Every day you'd have the great scholars come in Damascus, sit at the pillars of the mosque and teach. So I would sit at the feet of one of the great scholars, just listening what he was teaching in my spare time. But nobody knew who I was. And on this particular day, the scholar asks, I'm going to ask a question, who can answer the question? It's called Awisa, Masal al-Awisa, a very difficult question that only people fuhul of great intellect can answer. So he asks one of those questions, and nobody could answer, and nobody could answer, and nobody could answer. Ghazali couldn't contain himself. This little tramp at the back of the gathering raises his hand. The Shaykh says, what, you want to answer? He says, yeah. Shaykh Rahim, he's merciful, answer the question. Ghazali answers the question correctly. The Shaykh says to Man Anta, who are you? Ghazali says, what do you want to know who I am for? He says, I want to know who you are. Ghazali says, no. He says, tell me who you are. Ghazali says, tell me why you're asking the question. And the Shaykh says, I'm asking the question because there's only one man alive who could answer it. And Ghazali says, who is that? And he says, Muhammad ibn Muhammad Ghazali Atusi. Only man alive who could have answered that question. Who are you? He said, I'm Muhammad ibn Muhammad Ghazali Atusi. When he said that, the whole circle turns towards Al-Ghazali. Ghazali literally gets up and leaves Damascus, because now he's known. He's not after fame. He had all of that. He's after what? Fame with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what he desires, radiallahu anhu warda. That's Ghazali, okay? For the 10-year period. Purified, he returns back to his homeland, once again accepted a teaching post at the Nizamiyya in Nisapur in Dhul Qa'dah of the year 499 after the flight. Okay, this is 5 years before his death. Okay, Ghazali's legacy for us is in his books, not in his students. They say great people leave legacies either in books or in people. Ghazali left his legacy in books, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. Great works. Okay, he wrote 70 odd books, of which 23 have been published to date. And I'm not talking about just pamphlets, books. As Yahya al-Madin is 40 volumes. People have worked out Ghazali's writings and said for Ghazali, who's only going to live for 54 years. He dies at 54 lunar years, meaning like 52 in solar years, 52 in our years. He dies, Ghazali. He said for Ghazali to write what he wrote, radiallahu anhu warda, he would have had to have writ, and he did, 60 pages every single day of his life. That's what he would have had to have. 60 pages every day from the day he was born to the day he died. That's how much he wrote. And he did write it. One of the things you get from Al-Ghazali is barakah fil waqt. That's how we could do that. His time was blessed. Really blessed. No barakah fil waqt means a second becomes like a day. That's what barakah fil waqt. Like Isra al-Mi'raj. The Prophet ﷺ, a split second was like millennium for the Prophet ﷺ. Millennium. That's barakah in waqt. Ghazali was of the Imams of barakah and waqt. And the great work we're going to look at, Bidayat al-Hidayah, is about how do you achieve that. That's what it's about. Of the themes of that book, how do we get barakah in our time? How do we allow time to expand for us experientially, not abstractly? Okay? Wrote 70 of books, of which 23 have been published to date, in every field, in spirituality, in theology, in legal theory, in the law, in jurisprudence, in things like logic, philosophy. Every field of endeavor, Ghazali wrote authoritative works, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. And in between what? All the teachings, and being a father, being a husband, but he could still have the time to write, is Imam of what? Of great barakah, radiallahu anhu warda. Okay? Al-Ghazali himself recounts, 4 years after accepting the chair at the prestigious university, it became obvious to me that it is only by virtue of taqwa, consciousness of Allah Ta'ala, and restraining the self, the ego, from caprice, from desire, is true desire in the felicity of the hereafter substantiated. And that they ultimately rest upon severing the relationship between the heart and the world through forsaking the abode of delusion, the dunya, turning wholeheartedly towards the eternal abode, the next world, and approaching God, Allah exalted be He Ta'ala, with one's entire being, وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِي لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. As Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, I turn my entire being towards the one who originated the heavens and the earth, Allah. And this cannot be achieved except by turning one's back on notoriety, fame, and wealth, and fleeing from distractions and worldly connections, he says, Ghazali. He died in Tus on Monday, the 14th of Jumada al-Akhira, in the year 505, after the flight. May God have mercy upon him and sanctify his soul. Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah ta'ala, narrated in Thabat, عند الممات, firmness at the time of death, from Ghazali's brother Ahmad, who outlives him and becomes the principal teacher of the Nidhamir after his brother Muhammad. On Monday, the 14th of Jumada al-Akhira, at the time of dawn prayer, Fajr, my brother Abu Hamid made his ablution, wudu. In another riwayah, ghusl. He makes full ghusl. He then prays and then says to me, to his brother Ahmed, bring me my shroud, his kafan, what he's going to be buried in. He took hold of it, kissed it, and placed it upon his eyes, saying, we hear and we obey, sam'an wa ta'an, in readiness to enter the king's presence, the king Allah. Then he stretched forth his legs, facing the Qibla, and died before sunrise. Prepared for his own death. It's as if he had knowledge of his own death. In another riwayah, between his passing, being shrouded, taking ghusl for death, shrouding himself, and making the statement his brother said, he takes hold of a copy of Sahih al-Bukhari and begins to read it. And he said that Ghazali died with Bukhari upon his chest. To his last moment, inside of the words of the Prophet al-Ghazali, dies. And at Fajr, he makes that pronouncement. By sunrise, Ishraq, he's returned back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the sensitivity of the soul of Al-Ghazali. Okay? May God sanctify his soul. May God sanctify his soul. We ask Allah ta'ala for tawfiq that we truly benefit from the Imam radiallahu anhu, who's no doubt his spirit and his legacy is inside his works, radiallahu anhu warda. The more we study about him, the more we know about him. But the greatest way to do justice to the likes of Ghazali are in the works. Bringing his work to life. That's the nature of tajdeed. How do you bring the religion to life? And the religion is not brought to life abstractly in books, but it's brought to life inside of hearts. And that was Ghazali's intent by placing the legacy in books to reach generations long after his passing, radiallahu anhu warda, that perhaps he can still be reviving the religion even in the 15th century of Islam. We are of those who have a good opinion of those Imams, radiallahu anhu warda, good opinion of them. We want to be of those who bring the religion back to life, such that we make the likes of a Ghazali proud, which makes the like of the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, proud. Okay? To bring this deen back to life in and of itself. That's the purpose of this book, it's the purpose of this science, as we've said. If somebody wants sort of educational, intellectual stimulation, they're in the wrong class, wrong subject. It's not about that whatsoever. This is about being, okay? Bringing it all to life in your heart, upon your tongue and upon your limbs. So we ask Allah Ta'ala for tawfiq. In the beginning of the work, Ghazali is going to accent this point, really accent this point. The work that we're looking at, Bidayat al-Hidayah, if we're not of those who fulfill it in this year, we've got to question our religion. That's what Ghazali says in the beginning. He's going to mention all the various intentions you have for seeking knowledge, for being a Muslim. Remember Ghazali, we didn't mention Ghazali himself. He said, it's not sufficient in his Munqaf min al-Dalal. I don't want to be Muslim because my parents were Muslim. I don't want to be Muslim because I went to a Muslim school, born in a Muslim land. I don't want to be a Muslim for that reason. I must be Muslim because Islam is true. And his life was about apprehending the truth of Islam so we could live it. That's a great message he sends to each and every single one of us. That we be Muslim in the real sense, This book that we're going to study, mashallah, tabarakallah, is a very precious book. If that's the only book you study in this science, yakfika in our age. Sad, but true. That's the only book that you take and you realize it's sufficient. You don't need to read anything else. That's how low the standard has become in the age in which we live in. People become befriended, protected by Allah Ta'ala through that single book. That's happened in our age through the book of Ghazali. Ghazali is saying that if you can live this book, you're on the path to Allah Ta'ala. If you can't, you're an imposter. That's what he's saying. It's a very simple message. And we've got to keep the message very simple. Okay? A lot of us are going to sit in our age and we've all got an opinion of deen. And I think, we've all got something to say about the deen of Allah Ta'ala. Tayyib. If you don't live this book, uskut, shut up. You ain't got nothing to say. You can't benefit anybody. And you do not benefit yourself. You put yourself in trouble with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لِمَا تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Why do you say that which you don't do? كَبُرَ مَقْتًا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَن تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Grievously only in the sight of Allah is to say that which you don't do.